it's worth reminding ourselves that human beings are really very bad as individuals about assessing their personal risk. And we're seeing that at the moment. And for that reason, what you see is in these inter-pandemic periods is an absence of investment in these kinds of protections. So I think we see this continuing cycle of panic and neglect. And at least people were responsive when it was very clear that we had an immediate and present threat to us. But it also means domestically, we need to put in place standing arrangements and not do what so many people do with risk, which is to say that something that looks remote as a possibility, even though its effect is potentially catastrophic, we write that risk down to zero. And we go, that's not very likely. And we don't put in place the plans and arrangements. Well, let's be honest, everything from supply chains, loo paper, through to actually pharmaceuticals that we currently have shortages of, things which actually people need for their everyday health. Those problems we don't want to see again. So, look, I think people have done the best in the circumstance, but I think we, for the future, can do a whole lot better.
So most other countries at the beginning of 2021 had a portfolio of vaccines that had survived the process and were getting on with vaccinating people. But in Australia, it was too slow. It goes to a broader problem of how we do these policy arrangements. There's a lot of in-confidence stuff, a lot of behind closed doors discussions. Well, okay, that's fine. But what tends to happen is excluding other people around the world or in Australia who have the expertise, who have the knowledge, the particular knowledge about vaccines is really not just to say mRNA is okay or better or the technical side of vaccines, but people who are very skilled in dealing with big pharmaceutical companies and know how to procure vaccines and negotiate. A lot of that expertise, I think, was not where it ought to have been when it came to the Australian government getting on with the job. So, that's had real consequences. We're still very far behind, even in August, where we ought to be with vaccinations. Yes, there's a rollout, but the percentage of the population who's vaccinated is only still about 1 in 5. On what we can learn with HIV and AIDS, I've got to say in those days, the science and almost everything was out there all the time. It was an endless debate, as Jane knows, about what to do scientifically, about what we could persuade people to do to change behaviour, intimate behaviour, which was the only response that we had for a decade, really, on a population level. And that was, we argued that out and the people came along with us. And the politicians of those days didn't spend a lot of time fighting each other about HIV. They were united. They said, we've got to have the best scientists, the best communicators. You get on with it. We won't be doing the 6 o'clock press conferences. They just left it to people the community trusted to get on with talking about it. There were a lot of lessons that came out in HIV, and really it was very disappointing to see many of those lessons seem to have been lost in the response that we had to COVID.
Can I just make one additional comment about that? Because I think this is such an important point. The other thing that we did in HIV is we tackled communities in a way that was relevant to them. We talked to them in their locations. We talked to them with trusted people in those communities. And we did some really bold things. Needle exchange, places for needles to be disposed in public toilets, for example. Those things at the time, they were absolutely controversial. They were, for many parts of the community, quite shocking, but people were brave. They did things that they knew would actually stop those viruses circulating. So I think that level of bravery, not being led by the polls, being led by the science, what needs to happen, that's the other lesson. Talking to people through trusted sources and then being brave.